development space. Virtual has allowed us to do this, and as a result, therefore, we've got a tool which is our Actus Academy tool, which has got on-demand e-learning for businesses that perhaps don't want a learning management system, but they want some on-demand e-learning. And we run open training courses, change and hybrid management. So moving on to the purpose of this session. In your hybrid working model, I saw a number of you put in the chat that you are about to, or you've started a hybrid approach. Tell me, what challenges are you envisaging or are you concerned about? So tell us in the chat what you're thinking of, or what have you already discovered? Let's see if there's any similarities or differences. And in a moment, I'll also share a poll for you to think of the things that other people have mentioned previously that we can share with you. So Sarah at Gucci says, treating everyone inclusively. That's a really good one. I was reading more about that this morning, proximity bias. I think we can something to be done about that, isn't it? Employee performance, managing performance. Lisa, trust and questions about having a blanket policy that isn't sustainable. It has got to be sustainable, hasn't it? Wellbeing and motivation. Concerns about getting collaborative working well if they're in on different days. Absolutely, it's entirely different from everyone being remote, isn't it? Where you know you can just pick up the call and get hold of them. Impact on the culture, says Kate. The right solution for each person, so you might want somebody to be flexible. Employees resisting going back to an office environment, so some people feel that, you know, for whatever reason, Lisa, people have got to go back to the office, or culturally that's the expectation and people don't want to. So there's lots and lots. I'll come back to all those, some great suggestions in here. Some of the suggestions I've got from previous webinars, I've put in a poll so that everyone can get involved. I'm not sure whether this poll represents everything that you've got in the chat, if I'm honest, but so look, visibility, availability of people. These are the things we've been talking about previously. Difficulty switching off, multiple messaging platforms causing confusion, logistics of office attendance availability, lack of visibility of specialist skills, lack of informal information sharing, creativity, and people feeling isolated. So I think you guys have also got some additional ones that I could refresh in here, which has come through. Yeah, work-life balance. Some people don't want a hot desk. It's managers wanting people back on site, employees wanting to be at home. That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, that says quite a lot about, that's a trust one. I think quite a lot of people got a trust one, and we'll talk about that. It's kind of is a cultural aspect. And yeah, and Anka said biases again. So really interesting. Okay, so give you a chance to vote. 53% have voted. You can choose more than one if you want to. In terms of these, all of these polls are anonymous, by the way, except for the one at the end where we ask if you want to sign up for anything, what's in one we see. So say whatever you like. It's just to get a feel and share. So we've got 117 people on here, so it's quite a good number of people to nice to see what your views are. And so far, they're quite spread. Okay, so I'm going to count down. I'm nearly at 70% voted. Anyone else wants to vote, go for it now. And then I'll share the results and you can have a look and see what others say. Not all people, yeah, Jay. So there's a cultural thing, isn't there, about some people, they haven't embraced the hybrid workplace. But it's strange though. So those of you who are having those issues with trust, that's I'm interested. So I'm thinking, I saw, I won't remember everyone's name, Jay, a few of you talking about presenteeism, people, Laura said it as well earlier up. So somebody saying about worrying about the whole trust piece. Elise it was. So why do you think that is? Is that about the leadership? So Stephanie's saying the same thing. Is this about your leaders in your organization? Could you challenge them? Because in reality, I'm assuming people have been working remotely for the last 15 months, presumably effectively. Your organizations are still functioning. Is that true? So is it something that you could challenge? Can you challenge these biases that the managers have got? I mean, that's certainly been something that the organization I'm working with, it is led from the top, but they have been doing it. Interesting. So any of those of you about trust, or anyone who's been able to challenge successfully, how can you help these people who are having those issues? Elise is saying she's pointed it out and suggesting a trial. Good on you. Okay, so I've shared the poll results here. You can see it's actually really mixed. Lack of information, informal information sharing and creativity is the largest concern that continues to be it, and potentially people feeling isolated. I think I need to add in that bias one which came through as well. Okay, so on to our tips, which I hope will support a little bit in terms of some of the things you can do. So the point number one is that hybrid working requires a high trust environment, and it's about us being adult to adult rather than parent child. Now, it is really tricky, I think, because most of us, when we've been in HR or L&D or OD roles, unless you're actually the board sponsor, you can't, you're having to influence upwards. And therefore, it is about maybe holding the mirror up to people to say, you know, let's just look at the logic. So the facts, we've performed over this, maybe we've performed at a higher level. You know, the proportion of people who are they working hard or not when they're in an office. I mean, the reality is that people can be demonstrating presenteeism just as effectively sitting in an office as they are remotely. And it's encouraging these sort of grown-up approach to and it's a more modern really view that people it's versus Maslow's, it's the XY theory, isn't it? Hertzberg's theory of XY. It's assuming that actually if you motivate people, they do want to work, and if you treat people like that, actually generally they will. The other thing, of course, and I'm not going to go into this in detail here, is about giving people clarity of goals and expectations and measuring them against them. So quite often this low trust or this fear culture from managers goes down to the fact that actually managers don't really know how to manage. Completely separate conversation. I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail, but what is their fear? Maybe that's something to go and say, what is their fear? Why can't we trust people? I think manufacturing is tricky, Laura. Some jobs you just have to reality to do that. So it's about consistency, is it, for the other departments to be able to go in. It seems that you end up with a split setup, don't you, in that circumstance? Interesting though, but it might affect your ability to retain talent. The businesses I know that have been able to move to hybrid, and this is another influencing factor, have it's been seen as a really attractive asset. You know, I'm working for two firms. One is really embracing hybrid and they're running it as a trial, and their people are so positive about the way it's being run. And they when I've been hosting groups, they've been on there and said that they've got friends who are being told they've got to go back to the workplace, and those friends are looking for jobs, those friends are unhappy. So it could actually become, if you struggle to get talent or to retain talent, then it can be something to encourage. If you want to encourage that, then that might be a reason why people would want to do it. Anyway, fundamentally, for it to work, we have to set up a high trust environment. There's lots of ways about looking at this, but we have to think about how we can trust them, demonstrate trust from people, and allow them to live up to it rather than expect the least from them. And that needs to be led and role modeled from the top. In order to do that, though, we might need to remind people that it's a two-way thing. So if people are going to receive trust, they need to be trustworthy, that they're going to meet the requirements of their job. And this is a sort of model that is really key, that sometimes you hear when I've again done these focus groups, people say, oh, but so-and-so is always on do not disturb, I can never get hold of them, those sort of things. And we have to help people realize that they still have a responsibility. So in a hybrid environment, and I'll come back to this intentional point quite a lot, actually we've got to be intentional all the time about how we about where we are and when. It's not just a case of going, actually it suits me to work from home and therefore I'm going to work from home, or I'm just going to come in on a Tuesday and a Thursday because it suits me. We probably should start thinking about, who do I need to collaborate with? And this plays into your concern about lack of information sharing. So there's a responsibility that you need to communicate with our people, that fine if you're in a hybrid setup, but it's still your responsibility to share information and collaborate with those people who are your collaborators, your stakeholders. And that might mean that you plan intentionally to be in certain locations on days that are going to allow you to do that, or you make yourself available at certain times to be able to do that. And very, very importantly, we have to think about being responsive. It's not the case that you can just shut off all the channels and just get your head down and work remotely. However satisfying and productive you might feel you can be, we've still got to be responsive to people, even if that is using Skype or whatever your tools of communication are. So in order to be trusted, we need to encourage the people in our organisation to recognise that they're interdependent, that they are prepared to manage where they work, their availability and their responsiveness, because if they're not, it's not going to be sustainable. And one of you mentioned that it's got to be sustainable. And the reality is, if you want to work in a hybrid environment, and let's say you're someone who doesn't want to come back in, that's, you know, it's really attractive to you, then you've got to balance your needs and preferences with those of your team, of course, with the customer and the business or organization. So if your organization, again, going by, if you're in manufacturing, you can't create product, unfortunately, you've got to come in. So if you're in the NHS, you know, they've been working, it's mean no such thing as hybrid in most of the customer facing roles. Clearly in the managerial roles and the administrative roles, it's slightly different. But we've got to allow, our people may have sort of, over the last 15 months, they've almost gone heads down into a bit of survival mode, into a sort of look after yourself and individualistic type style. For us to make this work as organizations, everybody's got to act like a grown-up and think about how their needs and preferences align with the needs of everybody else, because that's the only way it will be sustainable. And that means we have to encourage a culture of thinking win-win with our internal relationships. And win-win, I've taken this from Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen Covey always said that if you have any other mindset than win-win, where a win for me also wins for you, whether you're the organization or my colleague, then it's not sustainable, because sooner or later, either the business will say it doesn't work, so they'll pull everybody in, or you might decide you can't get the information you need, so you might leave. So anything other than a win-win over the long term isn't sustainable when it comes to relationships. And to achieve win-win, we have to be courageous. So that might mean we have to trust people or set clear goals and expectations or challenge behaviors that we don't think are helpful. But we also have to be considerate and actually think, well, is it reasonable for me to expect everybody to come in just because I prefer it that way, just because I'm a social extroverted manager who wants to see and talk to my people as opposed to focus on tasks, as Connie's saying that? Is that reasonable? When actually I've got a bunch of introverts who love working remotely, and they'd rather, you know, they'd rather, if they've got a 3-hour commute, they'd rather spend 1 hour of that doing something for themselves and giving 2 hours to the business. Is that a win-win, as opposed to demanding people go back and come in face to face? So we've got all these sort of things to consider in terms of win-win. And I've got a couple of examples here which are based on real examples in a particular organisation. And this organisation that was really keen to go for it, in terms that they've been challenging these biases. So those of you saying you want to challenge biases, what's helpful is they've really got leadership from the board. They've decided they just cannot go back, and they've decided it's going to be a differentiator in the marketplace for them to create this flexibility, and it's very, very popular with their staff. But there are still certain managers who, for example, James has got a manager of 8 people and he likes to be in the office every Monday. 3 of his team have expressly stated that they prefer to work from home on a Monday. James decides to schedule training in the office every Monday. So if you were to think about your mindset, is that a win-lose, a win-win, or a lose-win? Thinking that the first interaction is James. So tell me in the chat, what is that? So James has got 8 people, he likes to be in on Monday, and he decides to schedule training in the office on a Monday when he knows that his team prefer not. Absolutely. So it's win-lose. And so if he carries on with that mindset, what's going to happen ultimately? If you're in his team and you know that your organisation wants hybrid working, you've said really Mondays are a nightmare to get in, the traffic's awful, or whatever, you've got personal circumstances where you could be so much more effective at home, totally, Elise, you're going to lose people. And it ends up, as Victoria says, in a lose-lose. So this is the thing, is we've got to, where we're challenging of trust, is actually what's the long-term implication of forcing people to do what they really don't want to do when there isn't a very solid business reason, i.e. the job can't be done elsewhere. So totally, it's a win-lose mindset. If this one here, I've managed to, the builder's gone off this unfortunately, so it's automatically telling you this, but I'm quite sure you'd have worked it out for yourself. So this is Jane, she's part of a large team, works from home because she's got a long commute. The majority of her team work flexibly, tend to be in the office on a Wednesday. She's under no pressure to be in office, but she feels left out because people forget she's dialed in when she's just on the phone. And this is the tricky thing about hybrid versus was all being remote, because if you get to the point where your team is in the office, but you're dialing in, we all remember that. It's really easy to be forgotten, and it's so boring, isn't it, as well, if you're just on a remote call. Now, Jane feels she must come into the office on Wednesdays to continue to feel part of the team, but she feels stressed and works longer hours to catch up on the time lost to travelling. So she feels she's thinking a lose-win. She's thinking she's got to put her needs secondary. How long would she do it for? You know, she might be, it's going to affect her well-being, etc. In terms of this long commute. And she may end up looking for another job as per the previous one. So the question to you is, what other options might you think that might be a win-win for either of those? So if you could suggest a win-win for Jane, what would be an alternative to that? And what about James? Anyone got an alternative that you could do that? Katrina, Jane chairs the meeting. That's a good one. So she actually then gets to be involved and to bring people in. Would you do it that they were on there? Everybody, absolutely, Nikki. Everybody uses video for the meeting. Now, this is an interesting one, and the business I'm working with is at the moment, they're still umming and ahhing what the right thing to do is. There is a bit of an uplift in the technology that is potentially needed to do that. But what we are seeing is the businesses that are doing it is they tend to try and put them all on video if they're going to do a hybrid piece. So we've all got our videos on, even if you're in the office, so that you can still see faces, rather than that old experience where you had people, you're on this, there's one of you on the screen and you've got people sitting around a board table and it's really difficult. So yeah, so try and have everybody as a standard. I know there is therefore the pushback, isn't there, about people being on Zoom or on screens too much, but I don't know, that's maybe again, it's also about our meeting management and making sure our meetings are as effective as possible. So great suggestion there. And absolutely, James should leverage teleconferencing for training. So these were possible win-win options. Your suggestions are spot on. James asks people if he really needs all of his team to be in the same place in order to effectively train them. The team trial virtual training, and I've got to say, actually, I'll tell you what, 18 months ago, I wouldn't have thought virtual training would work, but I actually now think it can be better, because you can just have a nice focused bit of training if you use technology and make it engaging, and people don't have to give up an entire day or traveling. It could be so much more time efficient. So they trial virtual training, and it allows James to be in the office, the rest of his team to be anywhere. Jane speaks to her line manager. They trial an open Teams room so that they can all dial into it while they're in the office, and so they can all see Jane and Jane can see them all. This is something this business I'm working with has done quite a bit of, and a couple of businesses have, and they've done it positively. I remember when we read all that piece about call centres saying you've got to be on Zoom all day, and it was reported really negatively as Big Brother's watching you. But actually, I've heard it the other way around from people who've chosen, has anyone on here chosen to do it? Where they've actually, just because they wanted to work together with the team they normally work closely with, they've just all chosen to dial in of their own volition, and then, you know, have a bit of a chat and talk next to each other. You've done it, Julie, have you? Yeah, I think it is weird, Katrina, but then again, maybe it's weird because it's different. But if it makes it, if it's effective and everyone's happier and more productive, is it a better thing? I don't know. Who knows? We might all be holograms within a few years. So if we're trying to challenge people, and maybe these are the sort of things that we could throw back at those who don't think they can do it. So it could be helping people think win-win, whether it's the individual or the manager. You know, first of all, taking personal responsibility. So how, if you're saying you want to work remotely, how do you plan to maintain strong relationships with those you don't see regularly? How frequently do you think you need to meet people in person to stay connected? What ideas do you have that will ensure you maintain visibility with your key relationships? How will you ensure that you are able to be fully effective with your choice of work style? What do you notice about all of these questions? I know this audience is a bit of a no-brainer to this audience. I'm so used to training managers that don't have a clue about coaching. So they're all coaching questions, aren't they? They are putting the accountability, they're open questions, which forcing the individual to think and putting the accountability on them. And this is a piece. If we're going to be in an adult-to-adult relationship, then we have to coach people to take responsibility for participating actively in this and for thinking win-win. So that was quite a detailed 1 to 4. Tip 5, these are more sort of do it factors, practical ones. This is something, and I'll put a poll up actually in a moment for you about polls, just again, curiosity in your business of how you're communicating as I run through this slide for time efficiency. So one of the things that have come through when we've been talking about collaboration with people is that you can, I think, because of the way in which we all went to remote quite quickly, and depending on how regulated your business is, depended whether you already had communications tools set up where you just used them more or switch more functionality on, or whether you just went, oh my gosh, we've got to go and buy Zoom or Skype, and you find that people have got multiple different tools. What we found was that some businesses have got too many tools, which has then meant that you don't know how you should get hold of somebody, or you're trying to get hold of people in 3 or 4 different ways, which then bombards them with more information. It just becomes stressful. So these are maybe some examples of etiquette. So if you're going to do it, so be clear. In my opinion, it's a good idea to give clarity. It's all very well saying you can work hybrid, but it's about making sure that people have clarity of what's expected in terms of what good looks like. And you could do this through focus groups, so you get people to define it for themselves and partake in it, or you can borrow something like this, and yes, we'll be sending you the slides, and you could borrow some of this and tweak them. But these are the sort of things that came out of focus groups, which was really about people being able to access people when they needed them, and also being responsive. So diary management, making sure other people can see your diary, and that may include blocking out time when you want to be undisturbed working on something, but equally blocking out time for surgeries or time when you're available for people check in or to be interrupted. Feel able to say, the world's divided into many different types of people, but there are lots of people who I talk to, and I know there's one here on the from the NHS, a few people I'm working with in the NHS at the moment, and I've been quite shocked at how they are quite literally on Teams all day without even a 5-minute break to go to the loo, and these are big Teams meetings. I mean, I think that's nonsense. I think you should be able to say, I'm busy on a task and I'll get back to it at a certain time, or I need to be productive, or I need a 5-minute break, or I need a lunch break. So block out your lunch break, look after yourself. People burn out. Seriously, I talked to a guy who's been on the podcast from Hallam University, who's just been off work sick, and he's an HR director because he was just going ridiculous all-day Zooms, all-day video meetings. And so we have to look after ourselves, and we have to teach people housekeeping and hygiene. And therefore, this all comes down to trust again, doesn't it? If you don't feel trusted, you feel you've got to be visible on a screen all day. But actually, if you know what my outputs are and I'm delivering my outputs, then I need time to be able to do those. And actually sitting on a meeting on a screen all day isn't allowing me to do that. And then you're finding that people are working into the night because they're having to do their outputs off calls. So that's got to regulate. And a lot of this is about the way we communicate, the way we make ourselves responsive. It's about respecting people if they're on a call. It's about using the tools to say when we're available. It's about being organized. Again, it's about being intentional to do things. But equally, when you are in a meeting or on a Zoom, put your camera on, get involved, get interactive, ask what the purpose of a meeting is, as you would do when we were face to face. And also participate in some of the social things, because you might have your introverts and extroverts. And this for me is something, again, where you go, when we last summer, probably we were all doing socials, bingo, and this, that, and the other, the novelty was there. And then as time went on, you've got the people who want to have the social piece, and the other people who go, right, they don't really want to have the social piece. There becomes a point, if you're going to a hybrid workplace, where I think you would expect there to be a level of natural interaction for chat, that it isn't just about tasks, but you might do that virtually. So it's almost going full circle, that where now you might just have the extroverts who are doing the socials. You might say, actually, as a team, now we're hybrid, we do expect to do once a month, we do a team meeting, and we'll have half an hour of that, which is just going to be an informal catch up, a bit of a chat, or we have an informal coffee, but we do still expect people to join just to have a bit of chewing the cud, what we're doing this week or otherwise. So there's some expectations there that stand for themselves, which are useful, and giving advice about, or guidance about, your collaboration tools. And anyone else wants to just participate in the collaboration tools poll, 64% have voted. I'll share that in a moment. Thinking about how you might want to, what you might want to do is to simplify those collaboration tools as well. So if you have, and some of you won't, but some of you may, 67%, anyone else want to vote on that? It's all right, we don't sell collaboration tools. I really don't mind which ones you do. It's just interesting for people to see what's popular. So I'll just let a few more people. It's gone up to 71%. Whatever you've got, whether you're in a position where you've got loads of them, and actually it does seem that quite a number of you, the majority so far, have got 3 or 4. I'm going to end this vote now and just share it with you so you can see what I can see. So you can see that 44% if you've got 3 or 4, 10% if you've got 5+. Is that too many? Should you cull some? I mean, for example, the business I was working with, lots of people were using WhatsApp because they don't have Teams set up, even though they are a business you'd expect them to have Teams. And yeah, interested, put them in the tools that you're using. I saw one earlier, actually, someone recommended a Microsoft one that I wasn't sure, I don't think I knew what it was. I might have to come back and look at it. Yeah, what is it? Teams Cortana. Use MS Teams Cortana to set out focus group time, says Sandy. I think if you've got Microsoft, which many businesses do, there's a whole load of tools which need exploring to work out how to do it. So what are you using, Chris? Yeah, so workplace, you need to have Facebook for Business, don't you? I've heard good things about that, Emma. Not many people said they were using that, but there's things like WhatsApp. People were using WhatsApp in this particular call center rather than email, because they're just emailing everything. And of course, email, it's synchronous, isn't it, as opposed to asynchronous. What we need now to be flexible is to have that asynchronous communication. In my business, we just have Skype groups, and you can jump onto that, which means that when people are free, they jump on, respond, and you can chat on a specific topic. So we have them set up for customers and various different topics that then you know why you're on that particular group, and it alerts you, but it doesn't interrupt you. Whatever it is that works. But when it turned out they were using WhatsApp, actually that was a no-no for the business, because they were potentially sending business information there. So what we need to be aware of, if you are going to a more formalized hybrid environment, I think it is useful to make sure that people do know clearly what tool to use when. And you see about 50% of you are not sure. I would have a word with whoever is IT and go, right, which ones do we want people to use? Let's make sure they can use them, because people have improvised, they've set up their own solutions, which is fine. But does that mean, but you probably want a consistent solution, is what I'm trying to say, because it's confusing for people. And also you end up bombarding people and possibly spending too much money on lots and lots of different ones. So yeah, lots of email. And I think email can become a bit onerous, and there are other ways of communicating with people. I've missed Google Hangouts. Oh yeah, I've got Google. Okay, so none of us can be familiar with all of them, but whatever it is, it's horses for courses. I have no affiliation. Although I have to say, I do find Zoom easier to use as a trainer than Teams. But I think Teams is more ubiquitous, as you can see from our tool here. So on to our final few tips. So 7, be aware, and some of you have already alluded to this, that you have got, there are people who are going to go through the change curve again. Now, as you know, if you've been on one of my webinars before, you can look back at our previous webinars. I've done lots on change, and I may do more on change, but just really rising and I suppose alerting you to the fact that maybe these managers who have got trust issues, for argument's sake, they're in denial maybe. And the only way to pull people out of denial, they're maybe in denial or in resistance. They're saying it's not going to work. So in order to pull them out of that, you have to help them see why it's necessary. You have to convince them with facts. You have to challenge them. You have to say, well, could it work? How could we trial it? How might it work? So being alert to the fact that, in fairness, when people are complaining about something, they're in resistance. That is actually a good thing, because at least they're not in denial and they're just going to act like nothing's changed and they're just going to be business as usual in the old way of doing things. So it's actually about encouraging people there. But what if we had a team diary, or could we try it this way? Getting someone who's going to lead it and emphasize it from the front can be really, really helpful. And before you know it, you can actually find, well, remind you that, you know, many of us have got really into commitment. That's why so many people don't want to go back to the office full time, because they're finding that they are more productive in this setup, and they're actually in commitment to this setup. So if they are forced to go back, they're going to go through denial, resistance, exploration, and commitment or not, if they're forced to go back. So how do you go about setting your team up for success? I would definitely challenge your own mindset if you're a manager, or share this with people who you think need challenging. So am I truly open-minded about finding new ways to incorporate everyone's individual choice? Might some people feel under pressure to compromise their choices or to become in a way they don't necessarily want to? maybe we should think, how can I be more creative? How can I use technology better to run meetings and training? Why don't I just give it a go? How am I demonstrating a feeling of trust and empowerment? So how well do I trust my team, or to what extent do I trust my team, and am I empowering them, and do they feel that way? Would they know that? And what's the impact of my own working choice on others? Because let's say I'm a line manager and I don't want to come into the office, but all of my team do. What's the impact of that? Going back to our whole interdependency piece, that we've got to plan to be intentional about where we are. I would encourage managers to talk to their team, to think about how they can create solutions. So you need to think about, so what are our overall commitments or deliverables? What are our dependencies or shared needs, either within us or within the wider organization? What working patterns are needed to deliver on our commitments? Let's say you're going to go to hybrid working, but actually you need certain people to be in all week or certain hours covering. Well, you can't just go completely flexible. People have got to think win-win and realize the interdependencies. If you've given people a choice to work in a certain way, let's say hybrid or working from home or occasionally coming or hot desking, what gaps or opportunities are there by people taking that specific choice? How can we maximize the win-win, and how can we hold each other accountable? So again, coaching questions, which is a very adult to adult style, involving others in creating the solutions. My final point is help people recognize the importance of being intentional. I think this is one of the key points to do this. Yes, you'll get your slides, don't worry. If this is to work, previously you could just be spontaneous because you'd see people in the office, you'd bump into people, and that's just the way it worked. Now, if you want to collaborate with people, you have to plan to. Hence my point earlier about maybe socials, whereas the people who've kind of had the social exhaustion, have got fed up of it, are choosing not to turn up to them. And that's been okay because the socials were just social, they were optional. If you're genuinely going to go to a hybrid environment, I believe that there is an onus on everybody to allow for some kind of informal conversation, some kind of informal socialization, which allows for the collaboration and relationship building. Basically, it's creating some time that's not purely tasked to build relationships, and that's about thinking about people's opportunities to develop and grow, thinking about issues about talent and career aspirations, which people are concerned about whether or not they'll be able to achieve the career aspirations they might have done, whether this whole proximity bias, whether there'll be visibility. So being intentional as a manager and an individual about thinking who, how, and when should I collaborate, maybe managing your diary out months in advance, saying I will be in the Reading office on such and such a day, can we hook up with you then? Like, I often go, I'm going to be in London on those days, and then you build things around it. So being intentional rather than spontaneous, I think, is going to be the way to build relationships going forwards, and prioritizing some time for relationship building, creativity, and face-to-face contact. It just might need scheduling in as opposed to happening just naturally and ad hoc as it did previously. So those are my 10 points. I'm not saying they're exclusive, but those seem to be the most important ones at this point in time that I've found coming up time and time again that we're educating people on. It's about high trust. It's about recognizing interdependencies. It's about alignment if things are going to be sustainable. Otherwise, it's not going to be something you can repeat. It's about thinking win-win. It's about giving some clarity around visibility and responsiveness, making sure you don't have too much complication around your collaboration landscape. Make sure people know how to collaborate and what's expected in terms of visibility and responsiveness. Acknowledge that people are going to go through the change curve again, whichever you decide. Be prepared to challenge your own mindset and those of others. Involve others in creating solutions, whether it's a trial or a pilot, and make it clear that actually we have to be intentional. We have to plan a bit. So maybe that's a good price. That's the only price to pay. We can still achieve a lot of what we had before. Maybe we can achieve 90% of the relationships and 110% of the productivity, and 110% of work-life balance. So overall it wins being a hybrid environment if we are prepared to be intentional. maybe. I'm not saying that's the same for everybody, but it is something which varies from one person to another. And undoubtedly, though, many people don't want to go back to how things were as they were. So I hope that that was useful. Please do, I'll just send the slides out and the video as well. So hopefully you can share some of these. We'll send them out so you can, feel free to borrow some of the content if it's useful to you. Let me just share what's coming up. And actually, I did mention this earlier. I've got one final poll for you that you can complete if you have a moment. If you are interested, this is the only one that isn't anonymous. If you're interested in either joining our open demo, so you can have a kind of behind the scenes look of Actus, no pressure for you to look at them, want to know about our training courses or academy, you can just register there. If you want to join any of our other webinars, I'm taking a break in August, but I've got 2 webinars going in July. And actually, if there are any topics that you'd love me to do to develop content on that would be useful or interesting, let us know that in the chat. I'd love to know. It's always, we're always slightly guessing what's important, and then you start working with businesses and realize this is topical. So if there's anything you think would be a useful webinar, what would make you go, yes, I'm definitely, that's a mustn't miss webinar, let me know. But yeah, these are the webinars that are coming up at the moment that are planned. This is our remote training. That's our open program, but we do run in-house programs. Lots of useful resources. The team's always got loads of useful resources, got a fantastic hybrid working flyer, which has got all the links to it. And these are all the links, and we will send those links out to you, so don't worry. How can you register for the other webinars next month? Guys, could you just drop the link to the Actus? It will be on the email that comes out to you, Jeanette, but hopefully, oh, there you go. Bang, well done, Helen or Gemma. Thanks, Gemma and Poise. There's all the links there, so you can sign on now as well if you'd like to. Oh, thanks, Victoria. There's actually quite a lot of content. It's a good job I spoke without breathing, isn't it? Hopefully it wasn't too quick. I apologise to those of you who are English as a second language. I know I do talk at pace. So keep an eye out. You'll get an email from my colleague Caitlin or one of the team, and that will provide you with all of the information that's there. If you've got a moment to fill out the, if you're interested in any of the information we've shared, then just indicate in the poll that's up. And I'll keep an eye on the chat, see if there's any other suggestions. What other topics are useful to you? What are you looking for? What are you signing up for in terms of webinars? Yes, Jay, you'll get the slides. They're coming out tomorrow. They'll come out tomorrow for you. Thank you so much for joining, Connie.